Welcome to another episode of the Relationship Toolbox, a show about the skills we need to build healthy relationships with others. On past shows, we have discussed behavior and what are the building blocks of behavior, which we labeled as three particular building blocks that we need to be aware of. The first one is, what feelings are we experiencing when we see or hear or feel something that is particularly noticeable to us? And the second is the thoughts that we experience in our head that try to explain those feelings that we're going through. And finally, behavior becomes the action that we choose to take to express these feelings and thoughts. So we could say that we behave the way we think. Today we are going to discuss how we form some of these thoughts and these beliefs that we are putting into our head at times.
Yeah. So Tom, sometimes we encounter people and we discover that they hold beliefs that are just so different than our own that we can't understand. And we get frustrated sometimes and we don't know how to interact with these folks because we only see the differences and the distance, and it can be really frustrating. So the first thing I'm saying that we should keep in mind is they're experiencing the same thing about us. We often are just looking at things from our perspective and making judgments about other people, but they have the same feeling about us. We are the other to them. But we can be left with just this chasm of like, how can you think that?
There's only one point of view.
There's one point of view. My point of view is the better point of view or the right point of view, but how can you hold that opinion? So it's also important to understand that our beliefs are a result of our lived experiences. And we do not always share the same lived experiences, so it is not a stretch to imagine that we are going to be shaped and end up with different beliefs.
It's almost guaranteed that
It's
we're going
guaranteed.
to come at it
Even
from a different...
in the same family, you could compare with a sibling and talk about memories or the way you understood something and it could be completely different because of birth order, because of the experiences that you didn't share.
Exactly.
So it doesn't mean that we can't evolve, that we can't be curious, that we can't bridge that chasm, but it takes conscious effort because we just have human tendencies that are natural, that are kind of on autopilot, and in order to overcome those, the results of those, we have to kind of put it on manual and choose to do it differently. So today we're going to examine some of these human tendencies that help explain how we arrive at decisions and how we tend to hold on to those positions and kind of unpack them with some examples. They are called the anchoring effect, confirmation bias, and the sunk cost fallacy.
Wow.
Yeah, all right, I know. These are like fancy terms for really simple ideas. So let's hop right into it. Let's start with the anchoring effect. When I say anchor, what comes to mind to you?
Yeah, and that, when I thought about that, it's more than one thing. The obvious is, of course, that we think of the anchor on a boat, that we want the boat to stay put in one particular place, and so we use the anchor. Another concept of anchoring, though, is to embed something in something else. For example, you might embed a photo into an article, which then creates a focus for people to direct their attention to. And it is more than just linking to a photo where you click to go onto it. And it becomes the focus then of the article. And a third concept of anchoring is to serve as a sort of a central point around which other people or objects contribute. And I'm thinking of the anchor on a news program.
Oh, right. Like pins down the stories, and then there are our satellite reporters that do the rest.
Exactly. Or the anchoring store in a mall. We talk about
Sure.
this store as the anchor for them all, and meaning that it is the central focus, what draws the others around
And it may have more weight and more substance
Correct,
than the others.
yes.
So, great kind of metaphors and conjuring things up. I think we have a slide here that might explain also that ideas and life experiences can be anchors as well. Things that we're taught, maybe. And the anchoring result can be a result of something that happened to us or information that was shared with us by a trusted or influencing person. So this anchoring experience or teaching influences our judgments of all similar things that are going to follow. Because our minds are associative. You can see in this very clever illustration, which is not our own, but we have borrowed it and attributed it. You can see at the bottom of the kind of like a brain being attached and kind of fastened, and it's holding on to something. So early experiences and teachings prime us to judge subsequent experiences and information against those initial impressions. So those become anchoring events or anchoring teachings.
Right, so that's similar to child development and the brain development, that we are exposed to different things which have quite an impact on us. And as a child, we try to interpret, why is this happening, or what are the factors around this happening? And we use a child's brain basically to try to answer those questions. Right. And of course, we know that when we have an immature brain, basically, the information that we have or we conclude is not always accurate. So there's another reason why the anchoring bias might seep in to an immature brain.
Yeah.
So are there other examples, Marsha?
Yeah, so let's just take some real life examples. People can be attached to products or brands. I remember growing up in my household, my father, who was the primary earner and also the purchaser of cars, had a thing for Volkswagens. We had 3 Bugs and 2 vans during the time that I was living there, and that was it. He wouldn't consider any other car. I don't know why that was. It might have been a cost factor. I think he was always bragging about they were like air-cooled rather than water-cooled, and they wouldn't break down, and I think they were simple enough for him to tinker with, but he definitely would not consider, for whatever reason, any other car.
And think of how that has evolved today to how we think about some of these vehicles.
Well, any kind of like preference, there's some reason that has impacted you, that you prefer and that you reach for that, and you may not, in your purchasing power, consider any other information about other brands.
And may not be totally aware of why you have that particular bias.
So you can get in a groove and then just kind of follow that. And then you're also influencing other people that grow up in that household. And you just kind of stick in your comfort zone and your habits, and it's just kind of automatic. But there are other examples as well.
Yeah, I'm thinking of just the influence of the family, of our parents, and the values and interests that they have and share with us. That, for example, in my own life, I grew up in a family of musicians, and everybody played an instrument, including my 3 sisters. So I was always exposed to music, and that obviously became an important factor in my life, and to this day, exactly. And I think sometimes had I had a different influence, for instance, if sports had been the most important thing in my family, how would that have changed my life today?
Right, and it is just by the nature of the family of origin of what you kind of incubated in. I know lots of folks who are booster members and even a particular sport. They might be like all hockey players or they're football fans. In terms of what the family does, and that's the in-group that you find yourself in. Right. It may even extend to like your allegiance and loyalty to other teams, professional teams, and that you...
In other organizations.
So this is kind of anchoring experiences that you have, and that we often just adopt because that's the water we're swimming in. And it's not until you kind of bump into people, either work or romantic relationships or friendships, or that have other things that you kind of feel like, what about this? There's another example. This time of year in Vermont, we have hunting season. And there can be a big difference in the way people feel about that, depending on what their upbringing is. I've recently spoken to a friend who is a hunter, and he talks about how much he loves being like in the woods and immersed in the wildlife and the dawns, and just he talks very nostalgically and poetically almost about the experience. And
was he raised in that?
He was raised in that environment and that practice and that tradition. And he talks about, he's mostly a solitary hunter, but he sometimes just enjoys sharing that with other people and kind of being connected. He said he's watched like the raptors and squirrels and the whole like food chain and things. And then there are other people who have not experienced that, who might witness it and hear it as just something so foreign that it's disturbing. And
very strong beliefs.
Very strong reactions to that.
Yeah.
And I was not brought up in a hunting practice. So you kind of have to examine, why do I feel this way about this, and extend some curiosity. I would probably not choose that, but to hunt, but I do eat meat. Somebody else, I'm kind of like outsourcing that. But it was a very almost spiritual experience for this person that I was talking to, and it reminded him of his father and his grandfather. So I can understand it, given that experience that he had.
As long as you opened yourself up to hear that and to
Yeah.
be curious about it. I'm thinking too of sort of another anchoring experience that we all go through, and that is the traditions, so forth, that we encounter in our families around celebrations and religious traditions.
Holidays and
holidays and so forth, and how that may not really become something that is particularly difficult for us until perhaps we marry to someone who has very different traditions. And all of a sudden those anchoring traditions and beliefs are challenged.
Yeah.
And someone else has something different. And we have to work through those.
And it may not even be that we are saying it's wrong. It's just that it's so important. And
What's familiar to
so,
us.
So familiar, and we enjoy participating in it that we can't let it go.
Right.
Even to make space for somebody else's. I know my son just got married a couple of years ago, and they're trying to blend their traditions. But we can think, well, this is the way we do it.
Right.
This is the way it has to be. But if you can allow for the fact that other people have different lived experiences and different expectations, and try to calibrate that, or at least respect it, it can be tough.
Right.
And certainly, as you're touching on traditions and heritage and maybe even religion, in some cases, we are going to have different lived experiences. And we see this right now in the election. The people are holding very disparate perspectives about things. And it can just be, you could be baffled by it. But if you really back it up and say, well, where did this come from? Or what was their experience? Given that this was their experience, it is more understandable.
Right. And what is their need to stay anchored in that particular
And we're going to
view?
talk about that a little bit later, because not only do we form these beliefs out of our experiences, but there are reasons another human tendencies that keep us there. And one we're going to introduce is called confirmation bias. So, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is one that I fall into myself very easily.
It's a human tendency.
I like to read and so forth, things that kind of confirm what I believe now. But I'm thinking too of what we're all prone to is the internet practice of the algorithms that they use and how they're using confirmation bias to keep us doing or believing the same things. That when we purchase items, and then they keep track of that and offer, the next time we open up the internet, more objects that are like what we purchased. Or even more serious is when the internet detects in the algorithm what topics that we're interested in and what views we particularly hold. And therefore, they feed us more of the same.
That's the job of the programming, is to please us and to give us what we're looking for.
And to create more business for them, yes. But it wreaks havoc on our ability to work free of a confirmation bias because we're getting more and more, we're being fed more and more of what we want to believe.
Right. I think we have another slide that is kind of the traditional Venn diagram of this, in that on the left-hand side, we have a circle which are facts that might be offered out there. And then on the right-hand side, we have the beliefs that we're bringing to the situation. And that area that's shared is what I'm willing to see out of those facts, because they coincide with what I already believe. They're part of my preconceived beliefs about these facts, and I may just discount the rest. So there are ways that we practice confirmation bias, and that would be seeking out information that reinforces what we believe. And that doesn't necessarily fall only to algorithms and computer programs. We can choose to get our information from sources that are friendly sources to our positions.
I'm thinking too, Marsha, about in your diagram there of the confirmation bias, rather than an overlap in what you might be willing to accept of facts that are not confirming. I see sometimes an approach where there isn't even any overlap whatsoever.
It can be, yeah.
There is an attack, really, on those facts to try to keep what we want to believe firm and anchored in our mind.
Because it's comfortable.
It's comfortable and it's reassuring to us to open up the possibility that something that has anchored our beliefs for some time, that there might be another way of looking at it, is very threatening.
It can change how we feel about our identity too,
Yes.
and that, or sometimes put our loyalties to certain groups in question, and that can be a choice. You know, do I want to choose this new way of thinking, or do I want to still be accepted and welcomed by these other people? And that could be difficult.
And our brains do not respond well to that kind of confusion. They like things that are firm, that we can hang our hat on this type of thing so that we can feel secure in that.
Right.
So when we open up other possibilities, it's not comfortable for us.
Well, we get a dissonance that is contrary to like our survival. Like I want things to be safe.
Right.
And when you are feeling dissonant, it's unsafe. So confirmation bias can be, we're only looking for information, like, oh, here, you see what you look for. You could also interpret information differently that is given to you. I remember in one of the classes that I was teaching with civics and economics instructor, they gave a description of a house in a neighborhood to everybody in the class. But unbeknownst to the students, half of the class was instructed to read it as if they were a realtor, trying to promote the benefits of buying this house. And then the other half of the class secretly was instructed to read it as if they were a burglar and they were casing the house to figure out whether it was a good place to hit. And so they read it silently. And then we talked about, well, what features of this house would you like to highlight? And I recorded them all. And it was kind of puzzling because they had read it following the lens that they had been instructed to do, and people were highlighting different things. They were elevating certain aspects and then totally discarding or suppressing other.
So it gives them sort of a selective observation.
Yes, right.
Depending on that
And
bias.
they were just trying to follow directions, but sometimes our priming and our experiences will will lend us to do
That's
that.
a very good example of how it works.
So, it was a great exercise that we could refer back to when they were doing research. And it was like, okay, so how are you reading this? And are you looking through a preconceived lens at the information that's in front of you? You could also choose to recall. I know that when we've sat with folks in mediation, sometimes they selectively recall things that are going to be helpful to their position.
Yes.
And then they don't remember things that don't help their position.
That's a technique in counseling that we can use to help understand a person's perspective by asking them to remember certain events from the past.
And we are more receptive to those memories that are comfortable than the ones that are not.
And we remember them. Others we either discount or don't remember.
Sometimes we can just give more weight to things. We could say, well, yeah, but this is more important than that. So those are all ways that we can confirm our preconceived bias. Finally,
one more.
the sunk cost fallacy. And I like to say sunken cost fallacy, but the term is actually sunk cost. This is the idea that we just can't move on from a position because we have invested so much time or money or reputation or identity or resources or whatever in something that if we abandon it or change, we're not honoring that previous investment.
Right.
And that will hold us sometimes in our spot and fasten us to that anchoring belief and that confirmation bias just because it's like, but I spent 10 years at this job, or I've given this relationship this much, or I've told people that this is what I used to think. I can't change
and
now.
To abandon that makes what I did before a joke, or it makes it...
it's really hard.
It breaks our identity with things too.
It's kind of like the gambler who's like, I know I've been here in this slot machine, but I just one more quarter is going to get
that
me
will
that.
make the picture different.
Or any kind of bad investment or unfulfilled thing, you can just say, but I've already sunken this investment. I have to get it back.
So in the time we have remaining, Marsha, what can we do about these three biases, the anchoring, the confirmation bias, and the sunken cost fallacy? How do we counter that?
Well, it requires effort. It doesn't just happen, because these are the human tendencies that keep us safe and keep us comfortable, and they're like on automatic pilot. So we have to choose, and it's usually because of a relationship or a willingness to try a little harder because of something.
Creates awareness?
Awareness, yeah. So first of all, allowing for the possibility of there being other valid perspectives. And I think that's just a good practice. I think we've tried to talk about what a great tool that is in conflict. Like, okay, I have a perspective, you have a perspective, they're valid truths to us. So starting from that place is really helpful. And then being curious again. For ourselves too, because we can not only help other people examine their anchoring beliefs, but we should occasionally check in with our own, saying, why do I believe this? How do I know that this is true? When did I start believing this? And you can ask another person those questions too, like not critically, but just with curiosity. Hey, so help me understand why you believe this.
There's a commonality in that it's not just something you are doing, it's something that I do as well.
Everybody does.
But it's different. It just is different in terms of what we arrive at in terms of conclusions. So respecting that fact that we all do it So let's find out where that anchoring
Where
belief
did it
came
come from?
Yeah.
And is it still true? Or is it something that we want to rethink, re-examine, and maybe unpack?
Right. And that takes the courage to do that.
It takes the courage, it takes some will, but you can do it.
Well, and also I think when we do have the courage to do that, the effect of it can be phenomenal in terms of bonding with somebody and finding an understanding with them. You still may not agree, but finding an understanding with the other person that we never experienced before. Now I know why you feel that way.
Why you feel that way. You were bitten by a dog. That's why you hate dogs. You know, like, I love dogs, but I get it if you have that underlying fear. All right. And you know, I understand why you believe that, because you were taught that.
And that could change my actions, so that if we were together someplace and I saw a dog, I would understand, whoops, this is a trigger for you.
Right.
And I could react to that, which then comes across as caring behavior for you. That's where the bonding and appreciation come in.
So allowing for other perspectives, being curious of our own anchoring, and kind of helping people examine their own if they're willing. Getting our information from lots of sources, vetting it, saying, how do I know this is true?
Or it's got to be true because I want to believe it's true.
And that can be uncomfortable, but it is kind of responsible as well. And it can get you unstuck with like, I didn't know that. I may feel differently about that now. And then, you know, the sunk cost fallacy is really hard because we don't want to feel loss. And
Or what will people think of me if I now admit that maybe that what I was advocating for before, I don't know.
I didn't have all of the information, right? But you could think about, like, if I stay stuck here, what is the continued cost of inhabiting this position? And maybe it's worth shaking loose. I can't get back the investment that I've made, but I can change the future. I could get out of this relationship, I could leave this job, I could rethink my position on this and maybe embrace a different idea.
Or maybe even share with others how you reframed some of those things from the past that you thought or anchored yourself with and now have revised.
Right.
And that could be helpful perhaps to other people.
Yeah. But they're tendencies that have helped us live and survive. And
well, the brain is structured to do these,
to
these
keep
things,
us,
unfortunately.
keep us going. But hopefully it will give you some food for thought for your own beliefs, and a little more understanding and empathy when you're engaging with folks who have different beliefs. And maybe you could even engage in a conversation about those differences in kind of a civil, curious way. In any case, we hope that you will be back with us soon when we continue with our explorations in the Relationship Toolbox.